Hi, this is Paul Neale from Penn Productions, and something a little different here. I'm in Unreal 4, and I'm teaching a class, and one of the things we need to be able to do is take the default character from the first-person shooter template, replace the guns, stop it from firing, and get rid of a couple other things. Let's just hit play so we can see what's going on here. So if we fire, we get the typical bullets. We also have the crosshairs in the middle of the screen and the gun sticking out. What we want to do is we want to replace that with a flashlight and have it light up the scene in front of us. So I'm just going to hit exit here so we can see what's going on. Now what we need to do is first just go and get rid of something, and that's going to be the first person HUD, and that is that little X there. So if we go into this first person HUD under the blueprints and double click on this, that'll load up our first person HUD. And in this first person HUD, what we have is a setup here that's drawing crosshairs. And all we really need to do is just disconnect this one node, and it should go away. So if I compile that, make sure it compiles without error, save it, I'm just going to hit play, and you'll see now that we no longer have crosshairs on the screen. So back over again, we should also, as we work on this, we should import our mesh. Maybe we should do that now before we get into this next piece, because it's going to get a little bit more complicated. Real fancy mesh here, flashlight that I built in a couple of minutes just from a lathe, and set the pivot to be about where I want it to be. And I can just export that. So I'm just going to go and say export selected. And I'm going to drop it down and export it as should be FBX should be fine. And so we'll say FBX. And I think this all looks good by default. We'll say yes and head back over to the game engine. We can import this in. I'll go and drop it in somewhere useful here. Maybe let's see, geometry meshes. I'll just put it in here for sake of argument. So we've got it here. I think there may even be one under the meshes character. I'll just put it in character weapon mesh. I'll drop it in here so it's in with the arms and whatnot, and it's actually in there. So I'm going to say import, and just going down and find that. I just dumped it to a bin folder real quickly here. One of the things you want to turn on right away is skeletal mesh. Make sure it actually understands that it's going to be an animated mesh, and so it's a skeletal mesh. So hit import and bring it in, and we'll have this new mesh. Now it says it can't find a bind pose, and that's because it doesn't have skin, but that shouldn't be a problem, and it shouldn't affect anything at all. So there's our flashlight now. So let's go back down to our content into our first person BP folder where the blueprints were. And now we want to work on the first person character. So we're going to open that up, and we're going to see that there's a lot of stuff going on in here that we're going to have to work on. So if you go over to the viewport tab of those, there's the actor and what it looks like. Now we want to keep the camera. We may as well keep that in there. It's just been added. And up on the left hand corner here, you can see that we've got our components that are all in order. So it's basically starting at the outer component that's just sort of a this big pill shaped thing that represents your character. And we have an arrow component, and we have our other pieces attached to that. So we've got things like our mesh 2P is our arms, and they're currently animated. You can see them moving. We also have a gun and a sphere at the end that fires, and I'm just going to get rid of that and eliminate that sphere out of there. We also don't need to have the VR gun and the VR marker. We simply don't need those at all in this, and so we're just going to delete those out of there entirely. I'm just going to keep the gun for a minute as we take a look at how it's being set up. So as we deleted that, I'm going to say compile on our event scripts, and you're going to see that it throws an error, and it throws these errors here. Now as soon as it throws these errors, you can double click on those, and it'll pop you down to these errors. Now we can do a couple of things. One, this is spawn projectile. Since we don't need spawn projectile, we could just delete it entirely out of the system and get rid of it. Try compile again. You'll see that there's one more error, and that's at the top here. And this is for the VR gun that we deleted. So again, we don't need the VR gun. I want to grab the entire thing and just delete it out of the system. Do a compile again and check and see, and everything's clean now. So it's compiling correctly. So let's just do a quick test on this. I'm just going to hit play. And so I should still be able to move the character around. I no longer have my crosshairs in there. I can jump and everything else that I could do before. I just can't do anything really exciting like shoot stuff anymore. So with that being said, these things are probably just fine, except we want to get rid of this gun at some point. So the other script we're going to need to know is the construction script, because it actually attaches things together. So we have a parent node, and this is our mesh to P, which is our arms, and we have the FP gun. We're going to add another mesh in here and reconnect. So let's just take a look at that. Oh, the one other thing we need to do is we need to have another socket. So we'll add that in a minute. You'll see how that comes up. So under add component, I'm going to go in and say add skeletal mesh, and it adds it, and I'm going to parent that underneath our mesh 2P, just like the gun or existing is. The skeletal mesh, I should be able to import this now, and because it was imported as a skeletal mesh, our flashlight shows up. So I'm going to select that, and now you can see that this is showing up as our item here. And we'll be able to hook this into the system. Let's go back to our construction script. The reason the gun is following the hand and the flashlight isn't is because of this construction script. So I can just drag the skeletal mesh out. I can rename it if I want something useful. That would be good. And I want to just make it the target now and plug it into the target here. So if we go back to the viewport, I just need to compile that, sorry. Compile it first. And you'll need to see now the flashlight is now hooked up to the hand and following it around. We don't want it in this hand, we want to get it in this hand. Here's the problem with this. Let's just grab our arms that are animated and go to the skeletal mesh for it. I'm just going to double click on it to get to it instead of finding it down in the assets. Down here I can just find it in the assets right here. Right there, sorry. So it'll open this up, and here's our arms. Now, if we look up the top corner here, we have skeleton, the mesh itself, and the animation. So we're going to go to skeleton, and now in the skeleton, you can see that there's this huge hierarchy, which is a rig going on. To be able to attach something in, we need to have an attachment point. In this case, is a grip point. If I select that grip point, which is attached to the middle finger, the right-hand middle finger, you can see that we have a grip point there, and this is what things are going to get attached to. So let's actually add a new one, because at this point we don't have one on the other side. So I'm going to grab that left middle finger, right click and say add socket, and call this left hand socket, and I'm just going to copy that name for so that we can get back to it. So you can see now it's on the other side here, and it's sticking right there. So I'm just going to go move it a bit better so it's sort of where you can see it. There you go. So it's in the palm of the hand. So there's an attachment point. This is something where we can attach things to. So let's save that and go back over to our first person shooter. So now it actually resides on this other side, and we can hook it into it and make sure that it follows it. So into our construction script again, if you notice it says socket name grip point. So I can just change that grip point with the one we just made, left hand socket. Okay, and once again I'll just hit compile, and back to here, and you can see it's now in the hand. And so it's in the hand, it's in the orientation of that point. So I could point that that socket in the direction that I want and set it up so that it's pointing along the axis that I want. Or what I could do is I could just rotate the flashlight. Problem is you can't rotate or move the flashlight because, again, of the construction script. It's saying that there's a location rule: snap to target, snap to for the rotations, and snap for the scale. So I'm going to set that and say keep relative to all of these, and just again compile that, and go back, and you'll see now it's popped off from some odd angle. So now we're going to have to move this into place. And I'm just going to turn off all my snaps. And then we can go about rotating it into the hand and getting it set up in the hand here. May even want it a little bit smaller. The size is kind of large, but we'll live with that. It looks pretty good. Yeah, that's not so bad. You know, the way it sits there. And that should be in the hand now. And following it. At this point, we really don't need the gun anymore, so we should be able to delete that, and you'll see that it's been removed out of the construction script. Everything's compiled okay here. And we should have a hand now with it in it. So let's hit play and see what happens. So now we have a flashlight sticking out in front of our hand. And what we want to do is we want to get a light in there and make sure that it actually has a light coming out of it. So back to our skeletal mesh. This is our, I'm going to rename this to flashlight. And it looks like it went jumping off for some reason. And I don't know why it did that. So I'll realign it again. For some reason, renaming it did that. I'm not quite sure why. It looks like it actually, renaming it appears to have broken the script, so it's no longer connected to it. So I'm just going to drag that down again and retarget that and say compile. And sure enough, it's thrown it off, but at least it's moving now. So let's drop that back in place again. This should be, I believe, 0, 0, 0. There we go. And we'll just set these to 0, 0, 0. And there's the starting point for it. And it should be pretty easy now to rotate into place. So that looks pretty good. That should be following it now. And now what we want to do is we want to add a light in. So I'm going to go to our add component again, go and find a spotlight and add it in. And I'm just going to parent it right up to the flashlight. So you can see now it's moving with it. And same thing, I should be able to drop in 0 values here and get it to pop right to the end of the flashlight. I'll just move it over so it's just right there on the end of the flashlight. And pointing out from it. Now looks pretty good. And so with that, we should be able to save it and compile and just make sure everything's good. Everything's working as it should. So now we have the light sticking out. And we can go and do a quick play and see what happens. Now, we may not see the light so well right now, so we need to go and adjust some light properties. So let's make sure it's really visible. I'm going to go back and find the light in one of the main lights in the scene here, this one here, and I'm just going to delete it entirely and say yes. I know it's referenced by another actor. I'm just going to take that out of there so that it was following this around. So now with that out of there, we should be able to get a light source coming out of the end, and we need to probably up its value. So I'm going to make it a whole lot brighter. I'm going to attenuation radius. I'm going to make that go a long way out, and again, just compile, save, play, and we should now have a light source out in front of us. And as we run up to items, we can see it light up those items as we point it around. So there you go, replacing your guns with a flashlight in Unreal Engine 4. I hope you enjoyed that.